what a matchup we have on our hands. It's the world champion Magnus Carlsen taking on Liren. E4, E5. Magnus has a look at the clock. It's 5 minutes plus 3 seconds increment. Rui Lopez on the board. Bishop A4. And are we going to witness the closed Rui Lopez? Yes, it is. Rook E1 or D3. Magnus takes a pause and oh, he chops off the knight on C6. It's the exchange variation, maybe the delayed exchange variation you can say. Knight to D2 and ding castles. Magnus plays his pawn to A4. This is his preparation. He wants a fresh position. Maybe B3, bishop B2. The knight can jump to C4. It's a standard position here, but also you may want to gain more space with pushing the pawn to A5. So perhaps Ding may want to stop that move by Magnus, and he does so by pushing his own pawn to A5 here. Now, one of the common plans in this position is to get your knight from C5 to E6, but then your pawn on E5 is hanging, so you push your pawn to F6 as black. As white, Magnus goes B3, and you can see Ding following this plan. He wants to come to E6 with his knight. But Magnus says, I'm coming for your bishops, Ding. I'll come to F5. If you take with your bishop, you lose that. Otherwise, I'll take on E7. He gets his knight here. Ding is like, be my guest. Take that bishop. But my knight on E6 is well placed, looking at two crucial squares on D4 and F4. Knight jumps to C4. And now, how does Ding continue? Because you may go to F4, but then the bishop is looking there. He goes B6. And now, does Magnus really want to take this bishop or not? Because if he is a little bit delaying that, then the bishop can come out to C5. Magnus takes it. Queen takes E7. And now black does not have the bishop pair. But what has happened is that the knight is well placed. The bishops are of opposite colors. Knight E3 played by Magnus. And perhaps for Ding, a good idea is to put his bishop on B7, then play C5. But the knight is coming to F5. And if given a chance to open up with F4, that could mean trouble. That's why Ding goes G6, stopping knight F5 for the time being. Time-wise, both players have roughly around 4 minutes and a few seconds. Bishop B2 played by Magnus. His bishop is not doing much on this diagonal right now, but if at some point you can engineer a successful F4, that bishop would be an absolute monster on B2. Now, how does Ding continue? Maybe he can put his pawn on C5 and then the bishop comes to B7. He does it. He places his pawn on C5 and he's not afraid of the knight jump to D5 because that would just mean moving his queen once. So it does not impact him that he has weakened his D5 square a bit. The nice thing about this time control is that you have more time than 3+2, which is the common time control in Blitz right now. But this is part of the Grand Chess Tour. And in that, 5+3 is a very common time control. For Magnus, he's trying to find a plan for himself. He sees that knight D5 is definitely a doable move. But the problem is there's nothing much after that, after the queen moves. So he goes queen D2 and Ding instantly brings his bishop to B7, saying that now no longer knight D5 possible. Rook D8 played F3 because bishop takes E4 was threatened with this pin here. Now for Ding, he's thinking about what to do. He's happy with his knight. He's happy with his bishop. He's happy with his rook, queen, rook, everything. But what about the king? Can Ding think about moving his king here? But that might be a bit too much. Like who thinks about moving your king there? You just want to make some kind of a plan. But maybe H5, king G7 is definitely one idea. Ding taking his time because he's going to come up with something bold, it feels. Thinking for quite some time. He's almost ready with his move, but he is making his final calculations. Magnus Carlsen knows that his position is pretty cool. He wants to bring his queen from F2 to H4 and king F7. What a move. Magnus stops in its tracks. By the way, this move is not just a very interesting move because Ding wants to bring his king to c8. It's the king walk, or should I say the Ding walk here. And Magnus has stopped in his tracks because that is something he did not expect. He gets two pieces in his hands and he's like, how do I take advantage of this king which is starting to wander here? He is in the center. Can I open up the position with f4? But then knight is well placed. Also, playing d4 is not at all possible with these two pawns, knight and rook. So all in all, the king might have a safe passage away to c8. But what a concept by Ding, and what an idea. Let's see if the execution will be as good as the idea there. Magnus is now down to 2 minutes 30 seconds and he has to speed up. Maybe he also wants to bring his king out and perhaps put it on that side. That could be an idea. But Magnus is an uncompromising player. If he sees that this does not feel right to him, he will take his time and try to refute that move. But Ding's move is very good. Even the engines approve of it. So Magnus kind of reluctantly goes to queen f2 because Ding's journey with the king continues. He goes king e8, queen h4, and it's time to continue the journey. You can go king d7, king c8, but also very interesting is to play rook d7 and move your king away to c8. Ding plays his king to d7. Wow, look at that king. It has already moved from g8 to f7, f7 to e8, e8 to d7. And if it gets to c8 and d8, it would be the safest king in the world. And then once the king is tucked away, black will not hesitate in pushing his kingside pawns down the board and opening up the position for the bishop on b7. Magnus clearly not comfortable with what's going on. Otherwise, he would have made his moves faster. He is thinking whether he should punish Ding for this liberty that he has taken with his king, or should he just continue normally, because there are many moves that you can play normal chess. But generally, when your opponent tries to move the king in the opening or in the early middle game, it is something that you want to punish as white. But how do you punish it? There's only one break that's possible, and that is f4, and it is firmly guarded. So what needs to be done? Well, Magnus down to just 1 minute now on his clock. He has a few more seconds, but he's coming down and he plays f4. Wow! Magnus Carlsen says to Ding, look, your king is in the center, and by hook or by crook, I'm going to open up the position. For Ding, look at the calmness, the way in which he thinks. He is such a cool and collected composer, sort of composed guy. And now, maybe we can take on f4 with the knight. Maybe we can take with the pawn. What should we do? But if we take with the pawn, then knight d5 is a very powerful move that Magnus has prepared. And that's why Ding goes knight takes f4. And Magnus sacrifices rook. Wow! Rook takes f4, e takes f4, and now knight jumps to g4. It's not so easy to protect this pawn on f6. You have one attacker, two attackers, and three attackers, and it's not so simple to face it. So how does Ding go? He has 2 minutes 10 seconds to figure this all out and beat Magnus Carlsen. Clearly he's better. The best idea here could be g5, but also to keep in mind the c4 break, because the biggest advantage of c4 break is that it weakens the structure here and also prepares queen c5 check in many of the variations there. What does Ding do now? Does he play g5 or not? The other option here is to play f5 and kind of trade the queens. But then after knight e5, king e8, it's not so clear, and he goes for g5. Good move played there. And Magnus needs to speed up. He's down 57 seconds on the clock. He needs to move faster. But how can you do that? Queen h6, good move, keeping up the pressure on the f6 point. Now a good suggestion here would be to play c4, because after bishop f6 you have queen c5 check, d4, queen b4, hitting the rook, and it's very difficult here. So, but Ding goes queen e6, knight f6 check, and the king goes back. And now after queen g5, Magnus has picked up couple of pawns. For Ding, maybe rook d6 is the correct move, but he goes f3. Wow, what a move! Point is, if you play gf3, rook g8 wins the queen here. So Magnus plays rook f1, attacking the pawn, but will Ding now find rook g8 and give up an exchange, because he is pawn down here and he goes for it. He finds rook g8, he plays it, he's not sort of attached to his material, he's ready to give it up at the right time. And now the queen is hanging, also g2 is hanging, so we have to be very careful here. Maybe the best move now is to play queen f6, offer a queen trade, but he does so via e5. And now rook g2, king moves to h1. Somehow, if the queen can get to h3, it could be a nice idea. But look at this, if you go queen h3, queen e8 is simply game over. There's a checkmate which you have to observe closely as black if you want to win this game. And also 50 seconds for Ding, 36 seconds for Magnus Carlsen. The best move here is queen g6, controlling e8, not exchanging the queens, and Ding finds it. Wow! With just 44 seconds on the clock, Ding Liren has found the move. And if you go queen check here, then king d7 is completely fine for black. And if bishop c1, then you have f2 with the idea of rook g1 coming up. So Magnus, with just 16 seconds, needs to move. In the background, it seems like Wesley So has arrived looking at the games. But with 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, Magnus has to make a move. He plays h4, which is a very interesting, because now there are no back rank issues, but clearly the g3 square has been weakened. And after queen f4, how do we continue? Well, Ding says, thank you for the pawn, I'm going to chop one, also attack your bishop, and he goes bishop. Here rook g1 comes back with his rook, and now Magnus plays queen e3, but after queen to g3, it's a forced mate. Magnus Carlsen resigns. Ding Liren has beaten Magnus with an amazing king walk.